Hey everybody, welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I am your host, Blake Morgan. Today I'm joined by Lesley Mottla, Chief Product and Experience Officer for ButcherBox. She oversees product management and customer experience, and prior to ButcherBox, she held leadership roles at Zipcar, Microsoft, and more. In this episode, we are talking all about ButcherBox's success. We're talking about how they built and continue to build a company with a culture of customer and member obsession. Please enjoy Lesley Mottla. Lesley, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. Are you in Boston today?
I am in Boston. Oh. Yeah, it's a beautiful spring day in Boston.
Oh, wonderful. Well, you have such an interesting background, and I was checking out your career history, and I noticed that you actually were a service designer, a service experience designer back in 1995. So you were like on the cutting edge way back before this whole customer experience thing was so cool as it is now. Could you just talk about that first experience and if you knew how big that role would be today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I actually think about that experience a lot today. That was, I think, probably my first entry into customer experience. In that role, what I was focused on, I was at a consulting company that was focused on high service types of organizations like hospitality, luxury car companies, healthcare, where we went in and we looked at the customer experience of that service, but also the operational experience and systems and everything underneath it. And then, of course, documented all that like journey maps and looked at where we could improve for the customer as well as operationally. And so it is like fast forward very much what I do today in a lot of ways. So it was, a really foundational experience and something that I kind of, in a lot of ways, kind of fell into, but really enjoyed and learned a lot about how to think about both the customer, the business results, and the operational and employee experience as well. So it was a very holistic view into analyzing from a customer experience standpoint. So it was a great foundational experience for me.
So Lesley, do you think that all that you learned back then is still relevant and applicable today, given the nature of how customer experience has gone so digital?
Yeah, I do. And I use those principles a lot in that I think any customer experience really is, it's an ecosystem, right? The customer is going through a multitude of interactions. That could be digital interactions, that could be interactions in the physical world, or both of those things. And then underneath it, there are people and systems and processes that still have to make it happen. Some of those technologies have changed, as you know, drastically. But it's all the same principles of, I think the benefit of service design is, or the service design principles is looking at the entire ecosystem, either for an end-to-end customer experience or maybe a sliver of it. And you really kind of need to do that dissection to figure out like what's the best way forward for the customer and for the business and for the people and systems that you're using to deliver any aspect of it. So I think it's still incredibly relevant. I think it's just called different things now.
Mm-hmm. So Lesley, you went on to work for Microsoft and then at Zipcar, and you were Chief Client or Experience Officer for Zipcar. Could you just talk about what you did in your first 90 days of building that role? And were you the first one? Did you inherit that role? And just all about that experience at Zipcar.
Yeah, I started at Zipcar very, very early on in the company. So I was basically the first person doing customer experience and product management. So I was kind of a person of one in that time period. And what I did was the operation was happening in a couple of cities, but it was very, very early. And so I had to kind of build the entire practice and the entire team, both from a product management standpoint and a customer experience standpoint. And I remember it was kind of interesting because that was a while ago at this point in time. And I had to really make a case for customer experience and thinking about the customer and thinking about the customer holistically and organizing our teams around the customer versus technologies, which is how the company was founded by a technologist, like wonderful technologies, but it was organized around technologies. And so I remember I had to kind of make the case to make that change around how do we organize around thinking about the customer journey. And, fortunately, I was there for quite some time and was able to organize the teams around that, bring a focus on the customer, establish metrics, all of those things. But I do feel like, my experience there was pretty early, in kind of the customer experience area. And one of the ways I did it was, looking at outside experts, people like Fred Reichheld, who was doing NPS, and Bruce Temkin, and who was at Forrester at the time, and bringing that information into the company from external people about how we should think about this business and put the customer first. So I really relied on external experts at that point in time.
Okay. Well, I was a Zipcar customer back in 2010, 2011. I remember living in San Francisco, and we didn't have a car at the time. And so Zipcar was really important to just get around.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what you're up to now. Let's talk about ButcherBox and what it is for our audience that have not yet had the experience of being a customer.
Sure. So ButcherBox is a direct-to-consumer company. We provide basically proteins in the mail. So 100% grass-fed beef, wild-caught sustainable seafood, free-range organic chicken, humanely raised pork, and other proteins in a very fast, easy, convenient way. So these are kind of the healthiest proteins that you can get, at a good value, where you order them online and they show up at your door, basically. And so, and my role there is really every part that touches the customer. So the end-to-end customer experience, that includes the product management team that's helping to kind of build the digital experience, and it also includes customer support as well.
So I understand ButcherBox was launched in 2015, back when it was still a little bit early in D2C. Do you think being an early mover was really positive for ButcherBox, and is it harder now given the space is a little more crowded?
Yeah, I think, I wasn't here for the launch, but I've known the CEO for a long time, so I was, kind of viewing things from afar as well. But I think, yes, they had very accelerated growth. They really used things like influencers and social media, as acquisition channels. And they were really taking advantage of the movement around, things like keto and kind of knowing where your, food products come from. And so I think they were, able to ride that really well. We're a company, in a mere 7 years, we're close to 600 million. So we've had incredible growth, and have continued to have incredible growth. So and things like the pandemic, unfortunately, was very good for us, right? Because people needed food and they were home, and many people came online to find their groceries or proteins and things like that. So while things maybe become a little bit harder, we've had a lot of great momentum, and that momentum around health and knowing where your food comes from, like that's still something that's really growing that we're able to really take advantage of. But to your point, there are people have a lot of options, right? And so one of the things that we do, is really hone in on our customer experience and understand, what our customers love, where they want us to improve. And I think, and we really act on those things, as well as kind of understanding the environment and certain trends and things like that.
So let's talk about what makes you different at ButcherBox. Many companies like to say they focus on customer experience, but what does that look like inside? Well, that really depends. So can you tell our viewers and our listeners what being customer-centric actually just looks like at ButcherBox?
Sure, yeah. A couple of things. One is we have, like many companies, we have a set of values. This is one of the companies that I've worked with that really, I feel like, lives by the values. So one of those values is being customer obsessed. So it's something, first of all, that we talk about with every employee. We talk about it when we're interviewing people. So people who come to the organization, we're kind of looking for that as well, how they think about it. So we've made customer obsession just part of that employee culture, first of all, which I think is really, really important to delivering a great customer experience. I think that's one area where we're very different. The other is that we have organized around the journey of the customer. So we have teams that are focused on, for example, engagement, a team that's focused on engagement, a team that's focused on order and delivery.
Can I stop you? What does engagement mean to you?
Oh, sure. Engagement to me is, interacting with your customers so that they want to continue to come back to you. Our business is mostly a membership, right? So engagement is helping them use and cook their meat, or proteins. So engagement to us is creating a very personalized experience of recipes. If you're getting a box that has salmon and tenderloin and veggie burgers, so that you have personalized recipes for what you've selected in your box, and we're helping you to cook and have a healthy meal and use that product. That might be one way of engagement, or cooking classes or things like that. So getting people excited about the product that they have purchased and engaged is one thing that engagement is, and kind of reinforcement to them too of the value that they are getting out of, purchasing from ButcherBox.
So I interrupted you, but you were talking about what makes ButcherBox customer-centric, what that looks like, and you were saying that you have a customer engagement team, that you guys do service design. What else are we missing of the full picture?
I think also a focus on the metrics around the customer. That is something that the metrics as well as insights. So I have a team of folks who do customer insights. And so that is also, both of those things are something that we kind of bring to the organization. The other part is that my group works as the glue to make sure that everyone else in the organization understands what's happening with the customer. So we have in our all-hands meetings that we do, we will, periodically review all the high-level metrics that we track. We will review the themes that we're hearing from our customers, what they love, where they want us to improve. And then at the level of teams, all of those teams are working with particular metrics. So if I'm looking at engagement, that team has their own kind of, list of metrics that they're tracking. But also we add to that a lot of qualitative research, which I think is a big differentiator as well, because, as you could just be looking at the metrics and retention rates and things like that, but you're not understanding people's behaviors and their emotions and how they're reacting to things. And so I think a big differentiator for us of bringing customer obsession is the mixture of qualitative and quantitative measurement, basically.
So you are regularly looking at data insights, Lesley, with your team on it sounds like everything.
Yes. Yeah. So, one philosophy that I've adopted, I think that works well, is we want to understand what's going on holistically across the entire experience, and then we want to dissect that and figure out what are those high impact areas from a customer standpoint, and let's measure those and understand what's going on with those, including like the regular e-commerce metrics like conversion rates or AOV or churn and things like that. So we also look, obviously at those, but also look at feedback. We do look at like net promoter feedback, and then we make sure that people actually are responding to that feedback, like closing the loop with people who give us feedback. That's another key piece of it.
That's such a big one, because how often as a customer do you get a survey like, how likely are you to recommend us? And you say 0 because you are terrible, and then there just nothing happens.
Silence, exactly.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's the worst. Well, since you've been a leader at a few companies, and one of the things I'm personally focused on is customer-focused leadership and what that looks like, and you've seen it and you've lived it, what would you say are some of the tenets of customer-focused leadership?
Yeah, I think one is empathy. I think people who have maybe empathy kind of comes naturally to them. I like to think that it comes naturally to me. I think that that's kind of a principle of customer-focused leadership, empathy. I think having a good understanding of kind of insights and research and the fundamentals around how you collect feedback so that you are doing more observing and listening versus kind of creating things because you think they're always important. So I think maybe that ties into the empathy area. I think also a good understanding of business and how you can work with the rest of your organization to prioritize things for customers and have a conversation around prioritization for customers as well as business results. I mean, I've worked in companies that are purely driven on profit, and their decisions are purely made on profit. And if you're doing that, you may not be thinking about the customer. Things like when you look at like added fees, of airlines and things like that. Some of those things they're not the best thing for the customer, right? So bringing that conversation to the company and being the spokesperson for the customer, that's something, if you want to be a leader in this, you really need to be comfortable bringing that view, to your organization or to decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things about this industry is some companies just really get it, like ButcherBox. It's a no-brainer that you have someone that's responsible for customer engagement, that you are using these metrics, that you have a chief customer officer. But for companies that don't get it, there's a big gap. So what advice would you give our practitioners listening that work for companies that just aren't quite investing? They want to, show me the money before I get involved. What advice do you have for those practitioners that are struggling, that don't work for a customer-centric brand currently, but they want the company to be more customer-centric? Where should they start?
Yeah, I think there are a couple places that they can start. One is, you can actually quantify, for example, a bad experience, or you can quantify the impact of a change that you want to make to a customer experience to make it better. Something like we, follow up with all of our customers that maybe have a complaint. We do the math basically to show the value of that to both the customer and the business. So I think that's actually an easy thing that people can do. They maybe think it's challenging, but you can make some estimations around, how you can improve the customer experience and what that can do for both the customer, because they'll want to come back, they'll want to buy more, they'll want to stay with you, and then equate that with kind of the financials, because that's often a point of friction in companies where you don't have a big customer focus. It's really maybe a a business metric driven company. So I think that's one area. I also think showing what other companies in your area are doing, like it could be, if you're in an industry maybe that's established, show your organization what startups are doing for the customer experience in your particular area. And they will start to see how those companies are using things like personalization and kind of, one-on-one conversation and using maybe customer support as a differentiator. They'll be able to start to show those, people in their company that there is a different way to do it. And it'll be pretty obvious that those smaller companies are kind of doing it in a much customer-focused way and in a lot of, a better way.
Yeah, I think those are all really great tips. And, some people give advice, don't focus on your competitors. But I've actually read quite a bit of studies that say, hey, if you highlight other companies that are doing great work and winning based on being customer-centric, you should show that to your peers and say, hey, pay attention. As we reach the end of the formal interview, before we get into our rapid fire, what would you say some of the biggest challenges are of working for a D2C brand and thinking about being a customer-focused D2C brand? What are those big challenges that we should know about?
Yeah, I think that, there's one challenge we have that we're, working on in earnest is that it is, it's predominantly digital, but it's also a physical experience, right? You get a box and now, all of that is in your home. And so there's always the challenge of connecting the, digital with the offline experience and making sure that you're paying attention to both of those things. They're, equally important. And to the customer, it's all one experience, right? They're not thinking that in those terms. So I think that, can always be a challenge because obviously like the delivery part is very operational, logistics, things like that. But I think just really connecting the dots between the online and offline is one of those challenges. And I think just continuing to make sure that you're doing the work to, really understand the mindset of your customers and do it at a segmentation level or a persona level, like really just taking the steps, to get to know the different cohorts that you have. Because as you know, it's definitely, most companies are not one size fits all for your customer, and you can tend to kind of think that you're operating that way, and that's not the case, So you really need to kind of dissect and make sure you're looking at, if I'm a new customer, like what are the questions that I have? What should we be doing for that new person versus the person maybe who's been, subscribing for a year, and they just have a much different mindset and experience. So I think that challenge is making sure that you're constantly taking it to the next level of understanding your customer cohorts.
So that segmentation, that persona work, it's not easy. I remember working at Intel, and we had those personas, but they just seemed so distant from what I could, what was tangible. Do you do that work yourself, or do you hire like an agency or consultant to do that for you?
Yeah, we've done it ourselves, and we've focused. For example, we've done cooking personas, right? Because we want to understand how people, use the product and think about it, and also like what is their experience as a cook, right? And so we found some really interesting things. We've found some things that are themes throughout the different personas. They're all interested in getting, the healthiest options for themselves or their family. But we've seen, for example, like different experiences with cooking. So what we use it for then is figuring out what kind of content and engagement types of things we can build and provide, and making sure those are kind of delivered to those particular personas so that they feel like the service is actually speaking to them. But we've mostly done that all in-house at this point.
I mean, you have such a fun job because everyone has to eat. Most of us like to eat. Some of us love to cook. And now there's been this whole awakening about what we eat and if it's healthy or not. I have to admit, I've been binge watching Yellowstone, and it's given me this whole new insight. And I thought, it does make sense to me that they would make a show about like basically where our food comes from and what it's like to live on a ranch, and a show that brings value to that work and just uplifts and highlights like the cowboys and cowgirls that do that hard work and we all benefit from.
Yeah. And we're actually, I didn't mention, we're a B Corp. So we are, one of 3,500 companies globally that goes through a really rigorous assessment of how we're doing from a, social responsibility standpoint and sustainability standpoint. So that rigor helps us to make sure that we're really delivering, that transparency to our customers, and that we care about, the farmer and the worker and the animal and all the components of it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how little we talk about where our food comes from and how important it is. I feel like, we have to serve up that conversation to consumers in a way that they can handle, but also like we need to have the conversation at times.
Exactly. And I do think it's becoming, you look at kind of younger generations, like in the research, we see that it is becoming a lot more important that type of information is available,
It's
in the
everything.
brands that they're dealing with.
Well, we've reached the end of our time together, so now it's time for our rapid fire. Are you game to take some quick, speedy questions about stuff, nothing related to customer experience?
Sure, that sounds fun.
Okay. All right, Lesley, what does your morning routine look like?
Well, I try to get up really early, or like 5:30, I think that's early. And it's basically meditate, cold shower, or cold dip in the ocean if weather permitting. I'm on the East Coast, Atlantic Ocean. 2 cups of coffee while I kind of get my day organized. Those are like my baseline morning things that I do before things get started.
Wait, I have to ask, do you live near the ocean?
Yeah, I live, I don't know if you're familiar with like Gloucester, Massachusetts.
I'm going to look it up right after this call.
It's like a fishing town, 50 minutes outside of Boston.
That's awesome. Well, good for you. Yeah, those cold plunges are amazing. Do you have a unique leadership hack that helped get you to where you are today?
That's a great question. I think that building your resiliency and building your ability to handle change are 2 areas that have really, really helped me, grow in my career and adapt to the different stages too of, companies. Because as you know, it's like different startups, very different from, your high growth or a more mature company. So I think resiliency and really understanding or adapting to change is just kind of getting, that term of like being comfortable being uncomfortable. Kind of thing.
Absolutely. What do you do to relax at the end of a hectic day?
Well, I do a lot of cooking. I really do like to cook and listen to some great music while I cook. I find that pretty relaxing.
What is your favorite leadership book or resource?
That's a great question. I mean, I think maybe HBR is a good one, but also like non-business books, like, books by the Dalai Lama and things like that. I like to kind of bring, that kind of mindset to, my day-to-day at work.
That's great. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
I would say appreciating, what I have in the moment, and certainly any time with my kids and family.
Yep. What is one mental health strategy for managing hard days?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm a big fan of meditation. I've been meditating for many years now, or like doing kind of breath works, like 59 inhales and exhales. Just try it and you'll feel better.
What is your favorite type of vacation?
My favorite type of vacation is vacations where where we do like volunteer work. And I did that with my kids when they were growing up for like 12 years. We went all over the world and we would build things or, help out in a community. And those were the best and are the best vacations to me.
If you could have lunch with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. Maybe Eleanor Roosevelt, because she was, an activist, a human rights activist, and also an activist for women's rights. This was kind of, post her husband being president, and I think she had a big impact on human rights and women. So that would be fun.
And lastly, if you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, Lesley, what would it be?
Highly optimistic.
It's funny, I just said your name, Lesley Mottla, and I said, what's your motto? So I could call it like the Lesley Mottla motto. That's the end of the rapid fire. Say that 10 times fast. No. Okay, well, it has been so fun having you here. I'm going to check out ButcherBox, and I love to cook and eat healthy protein. So, and all of you tuning in, you should check it out too. Lesley, do you have a link or a place where our listeners and viewers can check out ButcherBox?
Yeah, it's butcherbox.com. Pretty straightforward. And yeah, definitely check it out.
All right. Well, everybody, you have been tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.